Hi, everyone. I hope all of you have had a great time in the morning. And today, the topic of my presentation is machine learning the product, aka how to combine machine learning approach with traditional A/B testing, as is written in the agenda, so you're not in the wrong room. And I'm Boxun Zhang from Spotify. I've been working as a data scientist with Spotify for the last 3.5 years. My major focus has been modeling and understanding users' retention behavior. Meantime, I've also been doing all sorts of general measurement and analysis or modeling of user behavior. Before joining Spotify, I did my PhD in computer science at Delft University of Technology in Netherlands, where I studied user behaviors in BitTorrent. And that's about me. So the main message I want to deliver in this presentation is A/B testing is a popular method for learning your product, which we all agree. However, traditional A/B testing techniques are not sufficient for learning from your test. That means for many of your tests, you've run in the past, so probably there are a lot more you can learn from them. However, if you stick with the traditional hypothesis testing methods, you might miss out. Therefore, in this presentation, I would like to introduce you a different method that we have been using at Spotify for analyzing A/B tests, with the goal of maximized learning out of those tests. No matter what kind of product you have, either it's a web service or a mobile app or whatever that is, everyone agrees that learning from your product is crucial for a couple of reasons. First, we want to measure the performance, which is the most basic need for any business. Second, we want to identify problems. For example, if you have a mobile app, you want to identify if there's any path of interaction is broken, you want to identify those things. And lastly, we also want to discover some opportunities for future improvement, if possible. And for this purpose, A/B testing is a pretty good method or approach, as it's pretty well studied, is pretty feasible, is rather easy to execute as well. I would assume people in this room know A/B testing, more or less, as it's not always obvious. So in short, A/B testing is about starting with a hypothesis. So like anything can be a hypothesis. For example, changing the color of a button can improve the CTR of the button, something like that. And you have your user base, split it into two parts, control and test. And then you develop some product change according to the hypothesis and apply it to the test group, and hopefully something will happen. Then you can actually use all the statistical methods to measure if the effect actually exists. If it does, how big the effect is. So what we are essentially trying to get out from this A/B testing process is the link between the product change and the effect, or the causation between these two. With a very big if you can take very good care of your A/B test from the, as early as formation of the hypothesis to the execution of the experiment to the analysis of the results. There are so many articles on the internet and from academia saying, how tricky it is to take good care of your A/B test. But still, we want to ask if this is good enough. So I would say for some cases, if the changes you made are really small, are not that critical, probably it is. But for many cases, I would argue this is not good enough. And the reason for that is, with the traditional A/B testing techniques, we can only learn from our tests in a rather superficial way. What that means is, we can always measure the size of the effect, if the effect exists, but very often we can't really tell what's the cause or the real cause of the effect, for a couple of reasons. First, our product can be complex, and it will become more and more complex over time, because it's rather often to see companies adding new features over time, but instead of seeing companies cutting off features over time. At the same time, user behavior can be complex too. So this is like a fundamentally hard problem to, to deal with. It's very hard to understand what users will do, what users will not do, and why they do something and why they not do something. But also sometimes we ourselves complicate the problems by introducing rather big changes into our product instead of smaller changes. For all these reasons, the link between the product change and the effect we observe in the test group becomes less obvious. So here we have the product change. What really happens in reality is such change will lead to changes in user behavior in many different ways. Given that your product can be rather complex, you have rather complex user base. And it's actually those behavioral changes that lead to the effect in the test group. And if this is true, we probably want to ask a different question instead of just saying, okay, if there's effect or not. That's a little bit too simple. The question we want to ask, or we have been asking at Spotify is, among all those behavior changes, which ones actually have bigger impact to the effect? And later on, I will show, how we actually can measure or approximate the impact of those behavior changes in, using their predictive power. And keep in mind that nowadays in mobile apps or in most of the web services, once you have a change of, rather big change, the number of, the types of user behaviors you can change is probably quite a lot. And essentially, this is a multi-dimensional problem or even high-dimensional problem, which is not, our brains designed for. But luckily, the machine is designed exactly for this reason. So the solution we have at Spotify is we want to convert A/B testing problem into machine learning problem. So we can leverage the power of machine learning algorithms to, to help us to understand what's going on there. And the idea is actually quite straightforward. It takes only 3 steps to, to do. So first step, we want to determine the type of the problem in terms of, from the machine learning perspective. And we all know that, we have classification, which can be used to study problems like retention, conversion, click-through rate. We also have regression, which can be used to study, continuous variables like user lifetime value, session length, for Spotify, number of streams user has. And in our experience at Spotify, I would say classification is probably quite sufficient for our purpose. And at the same time, it's also a relatively easier task to build, as it doesn't have to give very accurate prediction of the actual values. It just needs to give out a binary prediction. So it's relatively easy to build models with a decent performance. The second step is about preparing user level measurement, which means we have to jump away from the group level data, where which is most of the A/B testing techniques are designed on, to the user level. So imagine imagine when you're doing A/B testing. So the only information you get, or the minimum information you want to have on each user, for example, if you're measuring retention, is if a user shows up in a certain time period. That's the only thing you need from your user. Then you can, summarize, sum up, the total number of users showed up, and do a ratio to calculate retention. However, in order to convert it to a machine learning problem, we need a lot more measurement on the user level. So we do not only need those kind of binary outcome of users. We do need very rich set of measurement that can reflect all kinds of user behaviors for individual users. So remember this link, from product change to behavior change. Now at this step, we want to develop user level measurement that can reflect those behavioral changes. And also, we want to switch away from the group level effect to individual level effect, or the target in machine learning terminology. And also, you should keep in mind that very often we have a lot more user level measurement than the number of behavioral changes we can anticipate. That's because for any specific user behavior, we can always have multiple different measurements around it to reflect different aspects of it. Eventually, we can convert all the user level measurement into machine learning features. And when talking about machine learning features, at Spotify, we also make a differentiation between so-called actionable features versus non-actionable features. The actionable features are the features that we can influence, somehow by changing our product. Well, non-actionable features are features we can't really change or influence anyway. For example, actionable features can be things like session length, skip rates, offline streams. Those things can be changed or influenced, from our side if we improve our product in a way, or if we redesign our product in a way, those things will change. On the other hand, we have non-actionable features like country, age, gender. So I guess everyone agrees that we can't really tell users to switch their nationalities. So our numbers look better. And of course, we have very different usage of these two types of features. We use actionable features to build models, the machine learning models. And at the same time, we use non-actionable features to segment users. As a result, we have lots of different user segments. And what we can do is we can build one model for each user segment. And in that case, each model becomes easier to interpret, and probably it's easier to achieve better performance as well. And of course, you can always mix all of them together, and then you will pick out those non-actionable features. But that will make the interpretation of the model a little bit trickier. So until now, probably everyone can see this is essentially the feature engineering step for any machine learning problem. And for this case, we do need very rich and high quality features to describe user behavior. And I couldn't really emphasize more about the importance of this step. There are so many articles talking about feature engineering is important. And I also need to say this is the most time-consuming step of this whole problem. At Spotify, I don't even know how much time we have spent, building our user-level data set and playing around different features, in order to make this thing work. And there's this famous quote from Pedro Dominguez in his paper, quite famous paper, A Few Useful Things to Know About Machine Learning. Some machine learning projects succeed and some fail. What makes the difference? Easily the most important factor is the features used. So there are so many other quotes, trying to emphasize this. So if you want to take this approach, I would really encourage you to invest, proper time and effort in this step, and that will bring you quite a big long-term benefit. The last step in this process is to, select a model. So we have so many different types of machine learning models, from linear models to deep neural net. Which model to use? At Spotify, we use the model called gradient boosting machine, which is also known as boosted trees model. It's a kind of similar model to random forest. And the major difference between the GBM to random forest is that GBM actually built decision trees in order, in sequence. So each tree will learn from the loss from the previous trees, while random forest will basically build all the trees at the same time and using randomly selected features and training samples. And for the actual implementation, we use the library called XGBoost. I'm not sure how many of you know this library. Cool. So in my opinion, this is a much better variance of GBM in terms of both predictive performance and also the implementation. So it's very scalable, it's very fast, it's available across all the platforms. And for those of you who actually know Kaggle competitions, somehow, you can tell before the hype of deep learning started, XGBoost was almost like the standard way for you to win Kaggle competition. You see people using XGBoost in so many creative ways, and they build so many crazy things. However, we are not doing a Kaggle competition. What that means is the prediction is not our ultimate goal. So we are not really striving for superior predictive performance. For example, for binary classification problem, we're not really striving for OC score of 0.95, those kind of things. What we need here is a decent enough predictive power. The reason for that is a decent predictive power of a model will guarantee us the model is trustworthy, as we don't really want to interpret a model that is barely better than random guessing the result. What we really want to get out from this is the thing called feature importance or variable importance. So feature importance is a nice way to interpret models like, random forest or boosted trees model, as those models are more like black box model compared to linear models. And in XGBoost, feature importance is measured in a rather simple way, which is the improvement in accuracy brought by a feature to the branches it is on, and then summarized over all the trees. So every time you branch a tree on a feature, you will calculate how much better your prediction become, and then you will summarize those things. It's pretty straightforward. And of course, in different libraries, this feature importance can be calculated in a slightly different way. For example, in scikit-learn, if I remember correctly, they use the different purity measures when building the tree to calculate this. But essentially, it's the same thing. And now we have everything. We have our user-level data. We have selected the model. We've determined the type of the problem. We can just follow the very standardized machine learning routine to train the model and validate the model. And now the features with the highest importance are the ones with the biggest impact on the target or the effect. And one thing to keep in mind here is that the result we get here doesn't tell us, doesn't provide us the causation information, from all the user level features to the effect. What it does is it provides us much richer information about the correlations between those user level features to the target, which we can use in the future to, let's say, design new tests or trying to close the loop between correlation and causation. What to do now? One very natural step is to examine those top features. We want to know how those things look like. And one disadvantage of using boosted trees model or random forest model is the model doesn't really tell us in which direction a feature is affecting the target. We don't really know if a feature is positively or negatively affecting the result. But it's solvable. We can just compare the distribution of a feature between test and control. Then we know how the feature is distributed in two groups. Then we can infer, if the impact or influence is positive or negative. But this is a rather trivial step. Another thing we can do is we can use those information. We can use the top features to derive new metrics. And those metrics will be rather informative, rather high level, but they're on the user level. And if you think about, traditional metrics we have, when running A/B tests, we have daily active users, weekly active users, we have retention, we have conversion, those kind of things. And it doesn't tell us much about users. We don't really know how each individual user is doing. But once we have identified those top features, we can start developing something like activity scores for each user. In this case, in the future, when you run new A/B test, besides those traditional metrics, you also gain user level information. That will be a pretty nice thing. So this is actually a more useful thing at Spotify we discovered, compared to the learning from the A/B test part. It's more like a nice bonus. And also, this can be a very iterative process, as we can always build new models, the same model, same thoughts, to understand which other features have big impact on one of the top features. For example, if the top feature can be number of active days of a user will have a super high correlation with the second week retention or second month retention. That's kind of obvious. But still, we can ask questions like, what actually make user to have more active days? So we can always build newer models or smaller models to understand those things until we reach a point that the company can understand the user behavior or the test good enough. So now I want to discuss a little bit about our choice of model. So we are not using linear model. So we all know that linear models are pretty easy to train, pretty fast, and pretty transparent, easy to interpret. So why we are not using that? So in our experience, we realize linear models have relatively weak predictive power, yet it's not very robust when your feature sets are very complex, particularly when your features have lots of outliers, are not like lots of are very skewed or very correlated. In that case, you have to do quite a bit pre-processing of your features, which is something we don't really want to do. We just want to take this step as easy as possible because our goal is not to build a superior model, but to interpret what's going on from the A/B test. Also, we are not using random forest. And we all know that random forest, in some sense, in some cases, is better than boosted trees model as it's very easy to train, it has fewer parameters, is less prone to overfitting. However, since our goal is to get feature importance, random forest has this problem of, the feature importance from random forest is inaccurate for correlated features because of the way it randomizes the selection of features to train different models, different decision trees. And if two features are highly correlated, and those features might be used by different trees in the random forest model, and then when you calculate the importance, the importance will be watered down, basically, for all those correlated features. And in that case, we will not be able to see the real importance of those things. And up to now, we have been using this approach at Spotify for probably 1.5 years. And we applied it to a couple of different problems. For example, activation, which is about understanding users' retention in the first 2 weeks or even 1 week, and also long-term retention and the churn problem. And at this stage, I wouldn't really say we've reached our final destination. We don't really have a ultimate solution for that. We are still learning every day. When we apply this approach to new A/B tests, we are still exploring different possibilities to understand better the feature importance because, it's still somehow black boxish. We want to add our own interpretation of those things as well. But up to now, I can say this is a rather promising approach to learn more from your A/B test. And I would like to encourage you to try it out. And if you have any questions or if you want to challenge this approach, I'm happy to talk to you. And that concludes my talk. And let's do some Q&A.